Right, I think that's probably got everybody's attention after lunch. The video you just seen then shows two athletes who used to be men. We saw former Australian handball player Hannah Mounsey and New Zealand weightlifter Laurel Hubbard. I think as society continues to be ever more open and the number of transgender individuals rises, it simply follows that a greater number of athletes will be transgender individuals. This session then is kindly sponsored by 39 Essex Chambers. We're going to look at how the industry is handling transgender athletes. Is sport equipped to deal fairly with a rise in transgender individuals across sports? And the rights of transgender individuals around the world, well, they're increasingly being protected through legislation. However, certain legislation is viewed by some athletes as detrimental to their rights. So what are the competing concerns and issues, and how best to balance out the interests of athletes of all genders so that those twin ideals of fair play and fair competition can be maintained? So to discuss this, we have our final group of panellists. You can read about them in more detail in your programmes that you've got with you. Please welcome to the stage, from our session sponsor, 39 Essex Chambers, Fernanda Morris, QC. We have the Chief Executive of Badminton England, Adrian Christie. Scotland hockey player and law and sports science graduate, Fiona Bruce. Consultant rheumatologist and senior lecturer at Imperial School of Medicine, Dr. Mike Irani. And from Bird and Bird, we have Jonathan Taylor, QC. Jonathan drafted the transgender regulations for the IAAF and IOC. Here's Jonathan. Right, this is quite a, let's say, a meaty issue, a complex issue. Mike, from the science point of view, the biological point of view, first of all, if I can start with you, can you explain to everybody here just a brief overview, probably more complex than brief, but you can give us a brief overview, exactly what happens when an athlete decides to change genders?
Well, it's an anguish. It's an anguish. This anguish has been going on for some time. It's not just a whim, a caprice, so they suddenly say, I want to change gender now. It's almost a release, and it's something that's humane, and we have to be humane with them. They can go for either a surgical reforming intervention, hormonal, to accentuate the gender that they've chosen, so either it's M2F, male to female, or female to male, depends on which hormones, and or they just don't do anything, they just stay as they are, in which case they've made the choice, this is what they want, we're a democratic society and we should be humane about it, and as doctors we are, on the whole. And so that's really what it is, and it's keeping it simple, but keeping it factual. Those are the three ways of going about it. And you can see that there are drug issues attached there that can affect fairness.
So explain to us the drugs that will be taken.
Right. Well,
I guess if we can focus on the main, I guess, point of contention is on focus, yes, is male to female transition.
Male to female. Well, male to female would be to try and reduce the testosterone because you don't want to masculinize, and to take estrogens to feminize. That's quite simply put, but that's the way it is. And the opposite for female to male. One category which we've not mentioned are those who have what are called inborn errors of metabolism. They are either mosaics, so instead of having an XX as in a female or an XY in a male, they have some of both. And depending on how much of each there, it depends on their manifestation, whether they are more male or more female, which makes it a real quagmire then. Then that's That's an interesting area.
The sports, as we know, competition sports in particular, is about fair play. Fenella, run us through the competing issues then that sport needs to be considering and is considering when it comes to transgender athletes.
Certainly when I looked at the literature to prepare for this session, it appeared to me that there are really a sort of multitude of issues and you can try and group them under different headings. It seems to me that one issue is the difference between elite sport and participatory and recreational sport. Because if we think about being able to participate in sport as being part of your expression of being human, that's the kind of thing which is going to be protected by things like the European Convention on Human Rights. And also, just intuitively, we would tend to see ourselves as an inclusive society. And if sport is experienced as something you do, in the park on a Sunday morning or, in the club on a Thursday night, that's a very different experience from what we see on the television as elite sports people. And it seems to me that there might need to be different approaches for different sporting arenas. I think it's also true that sport itself is, hugely heterogeneous, and different sports involve excelling in different ways, and it means that people with different physical characteristics may do differently. And so not every sport is going to guarantee success just by power and strength, and that means that therefore there might need to be different approaches. I think that therefore it might be difficult to have a kind of one-size-fits-all approach to inclusion or possibly occasionally exclusion where you're looking at sport.
I'll bring in Adrian and Fiona in a moment for your specific experiences in your respective sports. Jonathan, I mentioned that you played a key role in drafting the new regulations for the IOC, which are due to come out
very shortly, as soon as scientific paper's been published.
So can you give us the overview and the outline then of, I guess, how the regulations have evolved? I suppose sort of the history of where we've been as regarding transgender athletes from the IOC perspective, and then where the new regulations will sit.
Yeah, the IOC, the Olympic Charter has always said, do not discriminate unfairly on grounds of sex, gender, and etc., different protected characteristics. In the Stockholm Consensus was, I think, 90s now. That was the last consensus on rules for transgender athletes. In 2015, that was revisited. There was a very clear sense that they needed to take away restrictions on inclusion and only include those that are necessary to protect fair competition. As Fenella says, it isn't one size fits all, so the IOC guidelines will be a minimum, and it will be up to each sport to decide whether they need to do anything else. But what the IOC guidelines will say is it is not a requirement to have a legal classification if you're male to female to now have a female legal classification, because in many countries you won't get one. It is not a requirement to have surgery, because as Mike has just said, you don't need to have surgery. Did
that change in advance of Rio, not needing to have surgery?
Yes, so it was 2015 was when this came out, the basic principles. What you do need to do is reduce your testosterone levels. As Mike's just said, that's what you would do as a male to female trans athlete, trans person anyway. You reduce them below 5 nanomoles per litre. The 2015 statement says 10 nanomoles per litre, but due to a further research and survey of the data, it is clear that the female, normal female range is between 0.7 and 1.7 nanomoles per litre, and men is 7.7 to 29.4, roughly.
Right.
So that's why 5, because if your testosterone is over 5, it is because you've got testes, or a tumour, or you're doping.
So that's less than half what it was before.
Yeah.
Did the IOC get it very wrong before in their research, or was there not enough research at the time they came to that conclusion, a figure of 10 before?
The data was based on, every time you go for a blood test, you get your levels taken. Everyone does, and there's huge databases. But the measurements used to be done with immunoassays. And please don't ask me too many questions about this. I'm not a scientist, but they are unreliable measurements, and that was what the 10 was based on. When you do it based on mass spectrometry, which is the gold standard, you get a much tighter set of numbers, and that's why they've changed it.
It's from like a governing body perspective then, and when you hear these guidelines, what's the situation in your sport? Do you already have guidelines? Would you look to IOC guidelines for your particular sport, Adrian?
Yeah, so we had our experience, and I have to say I think governing bodies are probably all learning this at various paces. We had a call out of the blue in 2011 from a club, so we're just in our experience is solely around recreational level badminton. A call from a club who said that one of their members had turned up at a club night and announced that she was transitioning. And the club it was a cry for help. The club didn't really know what to do. I have to say they handled it in an incredibly mature way. We immediately contacted our International Federation, who pointed us towards IOC guidelines, which kind of didn't really impact on the recreational level, because at the time there was a difference between playing internationally and playing recreationally. And this woman has been a star actually. She, not through any self-promotion other than wanting this issue to be raised, has been really quite an advocate, and she's worked very closely with other clubs. I mean, I seriously can count on the fingers of one hand how many issues we've got in our sport, but nevertheless she's been a great help, and actually helped us in 2014, I think it was. We put together a club welcoming pack for people that were going through gender transition, and she was one of the authors behind that. So it's a learning experience for us, and we're in the process right now, based on the changes around IOC guidelines, that we will update our policy probably around about the end of this year.
I'm sure you have contact with other of your colleagues across sports. Does it feel as if the industry is reacting rather than sort of taking the step ahead to have guidelines in place?
I think quite. If I'm being really honest, I think this isn't the biggest topic for most sports right now. There's other real pressing issues. We've had a whole day so far of duty of care, particularly. And this, of course, could easily fit under the banner of duty of care, but the cases are, as far as we're aware anyway, as far as I'm aware, are very limited. But I think governing bodies, we've shared our documents, we've also seen what some other sports have done, and I think sports have, in the main, been quite proactive to put procedures and policies in place and support for clubs, and particularly for individuals that are going through a transition. But it's, the cases, I still believe, are certainly at recreational level are very small.
Now this might be one of the issues in itself, I suppose, is that numbers-wise it might be a sort of small issue in the bigger picture of sport, but actually for the individuals concerned, it's their life, isn't it? It's their identity, it's their very being and how they can conduct their life.
Well, I think we saw one. We have got 5 cases or 5 situations, but when we had the first one in 2011, within a year, 3 more followed very quickly, and then we've had 1 since. So I think there was, certainly when somebody speaks and feels that they can speak out comfortably, and that their governing body is treating the situation responsibly and with real sensitivity and consideration, then I'd like to think that the sport reacted in a very proactive way on the basis of that. But it's we're still learning.
Fiona, have you played with or against any transgender athletes, in the hockey being your elite sport?
I haven't in a hockey context actually. My only interaction with a transgender athlete was very recently. 2 weeks ago I started cricket for the first time in my life.
Cricket?
Yeah, and I actually was training with a trans woman, and it's my only experience of it. And she could bowl twice as quick as everyone else, and for a rookie that was slightly intimidating. But from a hockey perspective, you know, I like to think of myself as quite an open-minded and point of view, and because I'm brand new to cricket, it's very much recreational. But if I put on my hockey hat and elite level sport, if I was to come up against a trans woman on a hockey pitch, I think it would not sit very comfortably with me, because there would feel like there was this physical advantage and physical presence that she had over me. And whilst I like to think that I am quite open to all these kind of things, I'm not sure I could come to terms with it. I think that I would feel it was unfair.
These are the concerns that regulations are there to try and address, but of course it's very difficult to satisfy everybody who's taking part and who wants to take part. And from a player's perspective, I guess with in the club environment, if there are questions, if teammates wanted to know, well, actually, where does this sit in terms of fair competition or safety even? There might be the opposition who are questioning, saying, well, actually, there's somebody here bowling much faster or hitting the ball harder than anyone else in the context. Is there, I'm not sure which we should address this to, perhaps, but is there a right to sort of question and ask, well, what stage of transition is this athlete in? You know, have they been tested? Where do they sit within the regulations? Can you challenge that, should you wish to, at a recreational level, not least?
Well, first of all, the question is whether it should apply at recreational level and elite level. There does need, each sport needs to take the guidelines and decide for itself how it applies. There will be some sports where it doesn't matter. Equestrianism, sailing, there's no male-female classification, so it doesn't matter. There will be some sports where it matters a great deal, and where even the minimum guidelines will not be enough. You might argue rugby, for example, a full contact sport. I know hockey's quite a contact sport, I'm not sure a full contact sport. It's not enough simply to lower your testosterone. What I forgot to say, when you lower it below 5, you need to lower it for a period of 12 months before you will, sorry, I forgot that, and you keep it below 5. And the evidence, and there is evidence, is that after that period, at least the bulk of the muscle advantage should have gone. Of course, the bones will be the same size, there will be muscle memory, there will be other factors. And that's why international federations, who aren't very good at this, need to take a lead in their sports. I'm glad if the badminton were good at it, because usually they're not. And bluntly, the IOC is not very good about taking a stand usually, but at least they've led here to try and give people a framework. But it's going to have to be case by case. Each sport has to be different. Can an athlete challenge the rules because they think it's unfair to them, they're a cisgender athlete? Yes, I don't see why not. But if you step back, it's all about, the movement is towards self-declaration, gender self-declaration, so that we beeping. And yeah, complaining about what I just said. And it's, I should be allowed to declare my gender. And everyone says, we want to be humane, we want to be inclusive. And then people come up with situations where that doesn't work. It's interesting, I saw earlier this week, there were people leaving the Labour Party because they said, well, women's only candidate lists are going to have trans females, and that's an outrage. And I was thinking, is that an outrage? I'm not sure it is. But when it comes to sport, self-declaration of gender cannot work. It just cannot work, because it would mean Lionel Messi could go and say, right, I'm a woman today and I'm playing on the women's team. Of course that can't work. So the question is, well, how do we protect fair competition for everyone in a way that is as inclusive as possible? And the only thing I can tell you is it isn't an easy answer. But at least the IOC, for once, is trying to provide some guidance. And Mike and I were talking about this before, for international federations to have the IOC actually try and pull the information, pull together experts and try and come up with some sensible guidelines. I'd like them to do that in a few other areas.
Mike, what is your take on the guidelines, as they are guidelines, not guidelines, not regulations? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can see why. I can see why those that are females, as opposed to M2F, male to female, may feel that the other person's coming into our sport, into our weight category, and have all the inherent virtues of testosterone for the early part of their lives. But the trouble is, lowering testosterone, it doesn't just, you don't just lose power or strength. If indeed there is controversy whether it does do that, by the way, I mean, it's not as clear cut. And the phrase that keeps coming up is more research is needed, more research is needed. The larger the sample size, the more accurate your analysis will be, you know, in most demography. So what they say is that lowering your testosterone, compelled to, forced to, because you're a sportsman, will make you feel rubbish. Taking estrogens, people who've taken estrogen, who just take it for HRT or some such, or for bone preservation, for osteoporosis, etc., will find that they feel different as well, they may feel better. So just checking testosterone may not be the answer, or limiting testosterone may not be the answer. I think we're too het up about testosterone, because it's not just the amount of... Take testosterone as a key, and the receptor on which it works is the lock. If the lock is unresponsive, and you can have thousands of keys, but they won't operate the lock, so your testosterone level will be high. But they may be working on different receptors. There are different receptors in the brain, there are different receptors in muscle, bone, etc., etc. So it's not as easy as just to check testosterone. I think one has to look, and one has to be a bit cleverer. And Fenella said something very interesting about recreational. The IOC have said in weightlifting, which I'm the chairman of the medical committee of the IWF, have said that we'll cut down to 7 categories, 7 weight categories. So you're going to have big weight categories, big ranges. So you're going to have somebody at 55 kilos and somebody up at 65 kilos, big group. Now in that group, what do you say? Do you say the person at 55 is going to be disadvantaged because they're low in body weight? Or do you go for levers? You say, oh, they've got long arms and legs, they'll be able to lift the weight better, they'll be able to jerk the weight better, or whatever. Or he's short in squat, or she's short in squat, and she'll be able to hold it together much stronger because she's got a lower center of gravity. So where do we stop? Is it testosterone? Is it your chromosomal makeup, your mosaicism? Do you examine them? You know, go back to the Stone Age. Ultrasound for ovaries or hidden testes, cryptorchidism. Or do you measure their leg length, their arm length, and lever length? Or do you just look at the amount of weight they lift and you accept that they are what they are? This is, and the other thing that has to be contended is what is civil liberties and civil rights and freedom of choice and the way you want to be. That's something that we have to hold close to us, and I think I value what you said. Don't think I'm not for you on that. I think it's important to appreciate what the athlete is going through. They're humans.
The point Mike makes about humans being different and physical attributes are different. If you're on a hockey pitch, there'll be somebody who might sprint past you because they've got a greater lung capacity, or their fitness levels are greater, or they were born taller, or grew taller. What's the difference really between that and somebody then who is different because of transitioning?
It's a good question, and when I try to align my thoughts on this matter, that's something that played in my head over and over again. All too often these days, actually, I come across other women that are faster, stronger, taller than me, and I don't know really, and I don't know if it's Michael Phelps' wingspan is a huge advantage to him. I couldn't tell you scientifically if that's as unfair as this perceived advantage that a trans woman would have over the rest of us. And that's something that I'd have to become better informed about before if I was to majorly oppose trans women in my own sport, I would have to know the full facts and every advantage that they might have.
What about, Jonathan, the idea that more research is needed? What's your knowledge of the body of research and the breadth of research that the IOC went to before these guidelines are drafted?
Well, the answer is an exhaustive search, and there are few studies of trans athletes, only a few. But there is a body of evidence, there's a huge body of evidence for transitioning male to female, female to male. the suggestion that we shouldn't, it's dangerous to lower testosterone, that is the standard for every consensus, for every guideline for transitioning male to female. Forget it in athletics. That is what the treatment is.
Why
That
has
is
it
what we
become
do.
just testosterone then?
Well, coming to that then. So there are lots of things that make sport performance different. So why should we focus on testosterone? Good question. If it is a sport where you think it is required to distinguish between male and female competition, so for example in athletics, sex difference in sport performance is 10 to 12% across the board. And it isn't because of better coaches, better equipment, better nutrition, because those are the same across the sexes. The one thing that is different is testosterone levels. And when your testosterone, the sex difference in sport performance emerges at puberty, which is when the sex difference in testosterone emerges. All of the evidence, just one example, all of the evidence is that the testosterone going up by 10 to 30 times in a male as it is in a female is what gives you your lean muscle mass, what gives you your raised hemoglobin, gives you a significant performance advantage. Now, why is that different from Michael Phelps's wingspan? The answer is because we haven't drawn a line. The sport hasn't said it's unfair for this person to have this wingspan. They've said it's male and female. What's the reason for that distinction? It's the testosterone. So let me try and give this example. If we were to say, in this sport, weight is an important fairness category, like in weightlifting, 100 kilo category. If someone said, well, I'm 150 kilos, but it's natural, I'm not cheating, I just am, you'd say, well, that's fine, but you can't compete in that category because it's not fair. So it's a question of where you're drawing the lines. If you think it's unfair to have a height advantage, then draw that line and police that line. What we do say is it is unfair. Male-female competition is unfair in these sports. Why? It's not the only answer, but a key driver is testosterone.
Does that sound fair enough, Fenella?
I think that there are one or two difficulties with that approach. And there's a very interesting article by an American academic, and that person postulates the question, well, if you had a male to female transgender person who wanted to participate in a sport, and that person was in fact the same size and weight as all the other women in their category in the sport, why would you subject that person to an additional threshold of testing just because they're transgender? I think one of the difficulties for us is that we tend to have assumptions which aren't always borne out by the evidence, because I think in some of our discussions between us in the group, we've acknowledged that there are plenty of men that are smaller than some women, and so although we tend to think of the paradigm case being someone like Hannah Mounsey, who's big and tall and strong and already a successful athlete, if one thinks again about participation and recreation, people of all shapes and sizes are participating in sport, and you're just as likely to have a small, slim, not very powerful man transition, and he could end up as a woman in a sport then competing against women who are bigger and stronger. It's not necessarily the case that every man will have those power advantages. And if those aren't present, why then should that person be subjected to that additional threshold of testing? That tends to be discriminatory. And one model that some people advocate for, and I can see the logic of it because it fits with the general legal principle, is that people ought to be able to participate unless there's a positive, evidence-based reason for them not to participate. And I think that then does take us into this realm of the quality and the extent of the evidence that we have in relation both to transgender individuals and to the significance of testosterone. My perception is that there's very limited evidence in relation to both sets of issues because, as everybody observes, there's already only a small class of transgender people. And also because often their treatment has been quite patchwork until quite recently. They will have perhaps some treatment in one country and some in another. Certainly when people are making decisions clinically in this country, they say that for clinical purposes there isn't enough data. but also in relation to testosterone, I think there are questions, and certainly some of the data which has been relied upon, it's been suggested that there aren't big enough data sets, or there isn't enough causal analysis between testosterone and performance, and that there aren't these, an athlete's performance isn't just about testosterone. And so I would suggest that there does still need to be more of a case-by-case approach, and there certainly is a powerful case for a lot more research, because we just don't have enough people to inform our choices at this point.
Does lowering testosterone also decrease muscle mass? Does it have an effect on muscle memory, lung capacity?
All those things have been said, but nobody's actually 100% confirmed. It's sort of thought likely, but not positive. And one thing we really need to separate is exactly what Jonathan was touching on. There's a phrase of physiological levels of a hormone or a substance. Physiological, that's what we function on. And there's another word, pharmacological, meaning they are supernormal. Now, when somebody's doping, they won't take physiological doses. There's no point. They've already got that much in their bloodstream anyway. They'll take pharmacological, wacky great amounts. And that's the thing that we would absolutely support, everything about doping. That's not allowed. That is absolutely verboten. You can't do that. But when it comes to reducing it from 10 to 5, because there are new systems of measurement with GCMS and all that, so we have to say that needs question. Another point, really important point. We're not the same size. Nobody's the same size. So we're varying sizes, varying weights, as you said. So we need to put them in groups. We need to say, this is it. We can't say exactly 70 kilo body weight will compete, exactly 75 kilo body weight will compete. It's got to be a range, isn't it? And that range may include a range for testosterone. Who knows? There'll be some people who fire off at a higher rate of... and we know that there are certain people, certain sects, certain races that have higher testosterone levels anyway, and others that have not so high. And there's a bit of an overlap. I think you said there isn't, didn't you? But there is some data to show that. But that's, again, more research is needed. That's the catchphrase. And I'm really for finding out a bit more about, as you said, those that transition, as opposed to those that can't help producing more testosterone and lowering that. So that's where it's at the moment.
Can I just pick up one point there, because I think there are things that we might learn from the Paralympic Association in terms of points processes, because if there was a better understanding of the impact on performance, in particular sports, of certain testosterone levels, then what might be possible is to to make the sport as inclusive as possible, but with some kind of point system, which would work both for individual and team competition. So if there were the research there, which would allow people to make a better analysis of the impact of testosterone levels. So rather than it being an exclusionary rule, you could have inclusion, but with some kind of handicapping or point system. I think that might be a better solution.
So all athletes, regardless of gender, everybody would be tested and categorised?
Well, that might be one way of approaching it. If you say, if you were able to establish that testosterone levels are that significant, then you might be able to say, well, everyone is subject to this, and then there's a point system, because I think that the proposition that testosterone is the key distinguishing or determinative factor, my sense is that the data isn't there to back it up, to give it that prior status.
Well, I was going to come to that. Yeah. Well, it's being mooted, isn't it? The IAAF suggesting the DSD, isn't it? Difference in sexual development category. What stage is that at in terms of being brought in? Do you know?
So, intersex athletes is different from trans athletes. So we have XY chromosome, gonadally. The development is different from male or female. They are intersex. But there is a similar challenge where you have a female athlete, but she has testes producing male levels of testosterone. And the sport has to do something about that. It has to decide what to do, because In athletics, we divide between male and female competition. It is absolutely right that the sex difference in performance is on average. As we said when we submitted our brief in the Chang case, I wrote it with Liz Riley, and I said, if you want to prove that it is not every man is better 10% than every woman, I could have a race with Liz and we can demonstrate that she'll beat me any time. It is on average. If you say, well, some men would not beat women, then what you're saying is take down the wall between male and female competition. And I think you will find that in most sports, most participants will say, no, that isn't fair. So if that isn't fair, if it is appropriate to divide between male and female, then you have to decide what to do about male to female trans athletes and female to male trans athletes. Another thing I forgot, Olympic guidelines, no restriction, female to male. You also have to decide what to do about intersex athletes, because if you're treating like with like and different cases differently, then that gives you the answer to what you do with someone who has testes producing male levels of testosterone.
That brings in issues of other, doesn't it? Whether it's transgender or intersex, introducing a third or fourth category of gender when actually the psychological battle that the individual has fought is to actually belong.
Absolutely.
From male to female, that's their desire.
And the IAAF rules had to recognise that there's a potential for an intersex category, because legally in some countries there is an intersex category, and it had to say as well, or you can compete if you want in the male category. That seems ridiculously stigmatising to me, but that's what the CAS said. They said that's the option you need to give.
Would there be any support amongst the panel for a transgender category?
I think it's something that you contemplate when you're trying to work out what the answer is, and very quickly you come to the conclusion that it will be completely anathemic to the individual who wants to be part of a particular gender. And I think for the reasons I've explained, it's unnecessary that either people can be included on a recreational basis, or there might be some sort of point system. And I would imagine that ultimately there would only be a very small class of elite athletes who couldn't be accommodated in any fair way. I think although one has an intuition that somehow it feels unfair, when you start to drill down into the evidence and the accommodations that can be made for people, I would guess that more people can participate than can't.
Fiona, do you have confidence? You expressed sort of your doubt about how you might feel about competing on a hockey pitch against a transgender athlete, if it's male to female. Does what you've heard about guidelines, would that sort of fill you with confidence that if guidelines like that are in place, those sort of levels would be satisfied? Are you satisfied by the research as an athlete?
That's a difficult one. Well, I think, we keep saying more research is needed, so what is there to say that in 10 years' time this research, it won't transpire that actually the levels should be 2 or 20 or whatever? I actually, there's no immediate solution to this, but when I was trying to think of what might happen, certainly not, within the next decade, in 20, 30 years' time, I thought of wheelchair basketball as well, actually, which has a points-based system, and you can only have, say, 10 points on the court at one time, and that includes people that can use their trunk or can use their arms, and that's really the only kind of idea I can see of amalgamating, transgender people within the category that they want to play in.
Here is an issue then, with the fact that the regulations, the guidelines rather, have changed now, will change from Rio, and they could well change in future. Would there be a legal case for an athlete, so hang on, I was beaten to the gold medal by an athlete who, in current day regulations, sort of doesn't pass? We didn't have enough research then, but they clearly were competing against me unfairly. Could you foresee those kind of cases coming about in the future if research comes up and these guidelines are changed again and evolve further?
Well, two things. First of all, everyone is of course right that you have to, research will continue, there will be more data, and it is a living document, and it's up to the IOC and the IOS to watch that and make sure that they are at the cutting edge of where the knowledge is.
And they fully sort of appreciate that this is an evolving...
It says it in the guidelines, it says it in the IAAF rules, that is exactly what they will do. your question highlights the flip side, which is when you're talking about fairness, it's about fairness to everybody. Fairness to trans athletes and fairness to cisgender athletes. There has to be fairness to both. And you say these conditions do not allow for fair competition, then there's always two sides to the coin. And sports regulation is about trying to take those competing interests and striking the right balance.
The one thing that doesn't come through is choice and humanity. That's a strong word, perhaps not quite appropriate. That person wants to be a female and they want to play sport.
And they're being required to lower their testosterone to the levels that is exactly what the consensus is medical treatment should be for male to female trans athletes.
But this is a physiological level, not a pharmacological level. And to make them into a female, compel them to make them into a female when they're happy with what they are is, I think, controversial. The other thing is, the question is, what is maleness? What is femininity? Is it binary, or do we have a range, from, he's 90% male, or she's 50% female, What do we rate as femininity or masculinity? And does that confer attributes, as opposed to in hockey, you may be very good dribbler if you're a female, as opposed to a man who's very fast and charges through and barges through. So you wonder, what you're saying, Fidel, is right, that you can either divide it into individuals, just an individual being there on the platform and that's it, and that's what they do. And in equestrian, I'm not a equestrian, but why shouldn't they be gender tested? Surely a man is stronger if we go with testosterone making you strong, and he can control a more powerful horse, and a more powerful horse might be able to jump over fences, might be able to do eventing better, etc., etc. I don't know. So why shouldn't they be tested? So there's patchiness. There's some sports which are raw sports, and perhaps shouldn't say that too close to Buckhouse, but they may be immune from that.
We haven't got anyone from equestrian in the room, have we? Expert advice on handling horses. I do want to just bring up something actually that we saw Hannah Mounsey in the film earlier, and she wrote a column in The Guardian last week which was surrounding the IAAF new testosterone rules. So this is not about the transgender, it's about the difference in sexual development rules specifically, but she was relating it to transgender, so I thought it was relevant to our discussion here. She wrote, what the IAAF has done is back itself into a corner in any future debates when it comes to transgender athletes. The IAAF has clearly decided that a drop in testosterone significantly affects performance, and so it only stands to reason that when a trans athlete whose testosterone is suppressed finally reaches the top level of their sport, that they'll be allowed to compete without question.
Yes.
She says, however, I very much doubt it would be the case, because while society seems to understand the effects of what would happen if you reduce testosterone of an intersex athlete like Caster Semenya, people still seem to think a trans athlete who produces no testosterone would somehow maintain their previous abilities. So she's sort of veering more into society's perception, actually, more so than what the regulations
I've got good
would
news
say.
for you. The IAAF will adopt the IOC's regulations, so when she drops her testosterone down below 5 for 12 months, she'll be able to compete.
As a woman?
Yes.
Yeah. But it raises the question, though, about perception and education of the wider public, doesn't it? Because a lot of the debate that we're seeing around transgender athlete is being played out in the media. It's a very emotive subject, whether it's athletes, and a lot of their education might be from what they read in the media themselves. So I wonder, are we doing enough in sports? I mean, we're doing our bit here, I suppose, by talking about it, but is it talked about enough, Adrian? I mean, badminton players under your watch, other people within your organisation, how well would you say that it is actually understood?
Well, I think I was just going to try and kind of move away a little bit, if I could, from the international federation, IOC kind of, because the vast majority of people that play sport in this world are recreational sportsmen and women. And I think Fiona's point was a really strong one. In a hockey environment, or actually with a woman bowling a ball, at you in a, which I assume is recreation for you, then actually that's quite scary. And you know, we see the biggest issue that we've come across is acceptance. And acceptance at a recreational level. Now, we will be absolutely guided by our International Federation and who will be guided by the IOC in an Olympic world. Outside of the Olympic world, if X can become Y overnight and turn up at a club and announce who they now are, I think that's where there is a huge amount of education that's got to take place. You know, whether or not you're better, whether your technique is better, you can be, you know, you can play many sports. You know, sport I play is golf. I have an appalling technique and can't hit the ball very far, and then I get someone who's half my size, a fraction of my age, can hit the ball twice as far as I can. You don't have to. It's not about testosterone. It's about technique in a lot of cases. But if we, you know, there's a club that I play at where there is a trans person that's gone through, and the women just cannot accept. Doesn't matter how good, bad or indifferent this other individual is, this trans person is, they can't accept it. And I think that's where there's not enough focus, and it's a little bit like duty of care. Duty of care is very much focused at athletes in a world-class environment, but there are far too many people at recreational level going through the same difficulties, and we just look at the shop window all the time. We need to look at the whole platform, the whole environment.
I think if you pick up on that, I mean, isn't that an opportunity for leadership in the sporting bodies to create a more positive dialogue and perhaps get away from looking at these elite athletes who are such extreme cases,
Definitely.
And try and build understanding, which is about the sort of heterogeneity of human beings, get people to understand that, you know, you could be small, big, it could be about technique, it could be about psychological characteristics like grit, and build understanding so that there's less focus on you know, outliers and extreme cases and more focus on our similarities than our differences.
Yeah.
You gave the example of cricket before. Has there been a general acceptance of the transgender player within your club?
Yeah, there seems to be. I mean, there was, I got a word in my ear to be told that this was a situation. We had a trans woman as part of our session, but apart from that, there's definitely no sort of mumbling in the background or anything like that. I think certainly, in most clubs, in a training in a recreational environment, it is completely accepted. I think as soon as you step onto a sort of competitive field of play, that's when the lines start to blur a bit.
And it was put to me that there would be, you know, what about practical considerations? And I guess this is more so as well at the recreational level, maybe at a junior level, because there might be, you know, this is not something which just happens to people when they're in their 20s, 30s, 40s. There are youngsters who have gender dysphoria and may transition in their early teens or whatever age it may be. Is there consideration to be had for practical circumstances? It might be a male transitioning to female at, say, age 12, 11, where it's sort of a very vulnerable age. Children are underage from a sort of sexual point of view, and you've got a changing room situation. It might be a boy who's not undergone gender reassignment, then in the changing room with girls. How do you handle that? What is the best way to navigate that situation? There may be complaints from parents too.
Yeah, you don't hide from it. That's the first thing. What you also don't do is say you get changed at home or you get changed in the car park. So again, this comes back to when we put our welcoming pack together for clubs. You know, we were very clear to be, okay, there's going to be some sensitivity around this, so there has to be some sensibility around it. And and we have had situations where, and this was the advice that we had from the trans woman that was quite an ambassador really. Look, I can go in and change before, or I can go in and change afterwards. If you feel really uncomfortable with me being in that environment, then I'm quite happy to do something different. But I'm not going in the men's changing room because that's not what I am. And I'm not going to change at home because that's not what I normally do. And there's just, you know, I don't want this to sound too simplistic, and you just have to be sensible, but you just have to be sensible.
Communicate it.
You do. And I think that takes time. That will take time for for people and that's why I come back to the point about the recreational part. That's where we have to work hard at, that's where we have to educate, and that's where as a national federation we have to take some responsibility and share with other national governing bodies the good practice that exists out there, and use people who are quite happy to be advocates for us to help us to make sure that message gets across.
So the guidelines that badminton have in place, were they taken from IOC as a sort of starting point?
To some extent, although, as I say, the IOC guidelines or our IF guidelines were largely just around the Olympic environment. And what UK Sport Kindly helped us with back in 2011 was, we said, look, we've got this issue, and we have no idea what to do with it. And they gave us an expert consultant to work with us to draft up the policy. As I say, the individual who was the subject, I guess, of our first test case was very helpful in helping to author some of that.
I was going to ask what the level of consultation is
massive.
with the athletes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Would that be the same at IOC level? Is there transgender athletes that would have been consulted about sort of best practice in terms of
transgender athlete on the working group, and that transgender athlete actually has done some groundbreaking research on the difference in sport performance if you transition and lower your testosterone level, and found that you stay at whatever percentile you were in male competition, that's the percentile you'll be in female competition.
How is it judged, the period of time? You mentioned the 12-month period, that the level of testosterone must be at the requisite less than 5 nanomole per litre level.
Yeah.
Would that length of time potentially not differ as well between individuals?
Yeah, and the guidelines allow for that on a case-by-case basis, that you can increase the period. It's set at 12 because there are research papers on trans male to females that show that that is the appropriate period. That is the period that it takes for the muscle mass changes to be made.
So is it easy to measure, Mike, to judge what the period should be, if it is to be done on a case-by-case basis?
Different hormones have different half-lives, and they work on feedback, usually through the pituitary and the hypothalamus and brain. So one says about 3 monthly, if you change your thyroxine dose, if you were short on thyroid, you wouldn't test the patient again for at least 3 months, just to allow things to normalise. But a year would be pretty adequate, except for the muscle mass things. But they're not going to just stop training, you see. So they'll carry on training. They may train even harder because they want to prove the point or whatever. They're competing for something. And I think, again, what you said about recreational and the majority of people, and what was said about just recreational sport being the bulk of people participating, is absolutely right. But what we're talking about is not recreation for the people who are running or lifting weights or whatever. It's recreation for the viewer, for the IOC. The Olympics are a viewer's paradise. There's what do they call it? Couch athletes, couch joggers. They want to watch somebody else running, want somebody else to be playing football and throwing a cricket ball at twice the speed of sound or something. So what we're saying is that we've got to have some kind of all-encompassing rule, if you like, or we would say this is only good for competitive, high-class elite athletes. I don't know what the answer is. I think it should be what you said very sensibly about your trans athlete and how you would cope with them, and levels you would measure them in that. But when it comes to competitive, where it's their livelihood, they live off it. They've grown doing this. Gymnasts start at a terribly young age, and swimmers, etc. So it's their money, it's what pays their mortgage, etc., etc.
There's still a safety element to consider, isn't there, if there is a difference in strength, power at a recreational level? And maybe more so because perhaps the skill level of those playing with and against doesn't match. And
emotional for the individual, the emotional trauma that may be caused by saying you can't play in our competition because you're not a real female.
Do we have any questions or comments from the floor at this stage? Yes, so in the right midway.
Shout.
Yeah, you can start shouting. I think we can probably hear you.
A comment read to Panella. I think this idea of a point system is more stigmatising than the current proposed IOC regulation. That says you should drop your testosterone level to a normal female level, visibly, for example. But your point system to say that in a 400-metre race, the trans athlete would start 40 metres behind. They don't see that. That seems to be far more stigmatising by saying there's the person, you're different, versus the more invisible way of dropping their testosterone levels. So I don't quite see how that would work. There are some sports, the wheelchair basketball is a really good example, where you already have risk classes. But where is an individual sporting event where there's a known testosterone advantage and gender difference? I don't see how a point system would work. In fact, I think it would be more stigmatising.
I suppose the reason why I thought about a point system is that I wonder whether a point system would be better than complete exclusion. I think what I'm trying to explore in asking that question is the question of whether if you have a line and that line is based on testosterone, it doesn't take into account anything else, and for whatever reason it's not possible to bring the testosterone level down to a certain point for a certain period of time, would it be fairer to allow inclusion on a points basis? My view is that all of this needs discussion, and my questions really are whether having a single criterion, namely testosterone levels over a certain period of time, is the fairest way of accommodating people across a huge range of sports and across a huge range of abilities. So, I mean, if the consensus were that in fact a point system was more stigmatising, then I'd be entirely open to that. But I just wondered whether points might give scope for inclusion, where having a hard exclusionary line would be more draconian.
One thing that just occurred to me is, well, the IOC rules, will they also apply to, with the IPC? Is that separately to be adopted?
Well, the IPC's General Counsel is Liz Riley, is the person I mentioned before, so she knows about it. They will have to make their own decision. But the IPC is another good example. You draw lines in order to create fair competition. And in Paralympic sport, you draw lots of lines to make sure that what is allowing people to win is not their disability, the degree of disability, but their ability. And that's what this is about. At a very fundamental level, that is what is this about. Age lines, height lines, weight lines, sex lines is about trying to define where it is you can have fair, meaningful competition. That's all it's about.
You could potentially see a scenario if there's a transgender Paralympian, for example. You've not only got you've got the Paralympic category, so the B2 or whatever, B2 plus transgender. How many other B2 transgender judo players might there be to compete against even? You might end up in a class of one when you break categories down into such sort of minutiae. It's another challenge. And do you have any other questions and comments? Well, yes, over on the left-hand side. If your lungs are feeling good, you can shout. I think a microphone is making its way to you.
Yes, hello. I'm Andy Brown from the Sports Integrity Initiative. Dr. Ronnie, you mentioned that basically anyone who supports to lower their testosterone levels below what is required by the physiology will basically feel a bit rubbish, I think is the word you used. And I just wondered if any research has been done on the sort of health impact on athletes of having to reduce their testosterone levels, their naturally occurring testosterone levels to under 5 millimoles per litre.
Well, we have something called the athlete's passport. You know that, don't you? The steroid profiling passport. So we know what that athlete was doing before. If they don't just arrive on the international scene, they've been trained. You know, you've got to be tested before you arrive. So we kind of know what their levels are, and this is to be expected. So they really shouldn't change thereafter. Do you see what I mean? So why change them? I understand what Jonathan says, but
that's kind of my question.
That's it.
What shows?
Well, if I could just jump in one more time. Well, the proposition is that you're excluding a trans male to female athlete because they don't want to reduce their testosterone below 5. Now, the testosterone is androgenizing, but we're taking estrogen to feminise. If you look at every single protocol, consensus statement for treatment of trans male to female individuals, it is reduce your testosterone to the female range, which is below 2. So it is not as if the IOC requirement is somehow outlandish or different or against medical advice. It is no different from the standard medical protocol. So you can tell me, if you like, that it's bad for them. You better go and tell that to all of those doctors out there treating trans male to female individuals who aren't athletes.
But the athlete may not want to do that. I mean, that's the thing. That's what we're talking about. Just because they've changed their gender appearance to civilized society that surrounds them, it doesn't mean they have to change their metabolism as well in order to conform, just to compete in that sport.
Well, it does, and the question is whether it's right or not.
Well, that may be we're treating the others rather than treating that person.
I suppose when these regulations are all new, it feels very sudden. If guidelines have been in place for a long time and a transgender athlete who knows that they intend to or would like to compete in sport sort of is aware of the situation for many years in advance, does that sort of, it doesn't necessarily change whether it's, I guess, the right or wrongness of it.
We have to do it. I'm afraid that if the IOC has said it and we want to belong to that club and we want to be at the Olympics, we have to accept everything that goes with it.
Right, well, the IOC guidelines are guidelines, Mike, so you don't have to follow them if you don't want to.
So sport could look at it and say, the female rate is, as you said, 2 and lower. So a particular sport might say, we're going to set our regulations at less than 2 nanomoles per litre.
Sorry, it's 5 and
Oh, it is 5, sorry,
yeah.
And then it's up to that sport to decide what their regulations will be.
Or you could take Mike's approach where a man can say, I'm a woman, and I'm not lowering my testosterone, and I must be allowed to compete in the female category.
So where would you take that argument to? That then take it to a court to
Ad
challenge
absurdum.
the IOC? And we go around in circles.
It's like one of those Escher sketches, the hand drawing the other hand, or waterfalls that keep flowing around and around. We're not going to solve it today, but it's rather like that. We've come back to where we started. What is a man? What is a woman? And when do we say you're a man or you're a woman now?
Maybe I'll come to each of you in closing, in a sense, to get a feel for if you feel the right steps are being taken, are the right conversations being had, and what degree of satisfaction you have with the situation as it stands. Vanilla, where would you sit?
I'm encouraged that there are conversations, and I'm encouraged that when people start to test some of the things that people say in those conversations, one of the responses is we need to do more research. And I think probably what needs to happen as well is someone needs to test out how these guidelines are working and how they're being interpreted. And that also has to happen in the context probably of wider social change and acceptance, so that when people talk about someone being a transgender athlete, they don't have an immediate sense of sort of shock or discomfort, and that becomes more normal. And perhaps we're just at the beginning of a process, and as long as people keep talking and keep researching, then there's scope. But I would be reluctant for us all just to stay stuck exactly where we are now. I think there probably is further to go.
Adrian, too much focus at the elite level at this stage?
Well, no, because I mean, sport is the grassroots as well as the world class. I mean, I think Jonathan's point is absolutely right. I think it's absolutely the right thing for the IOC to produce guidelines, because every sport is so different, and I think that it's then up to the IOC to make their interpretation, or correct their interpretation of their regulations. Where I do think we're missing at grassroots level, and there could be some commonality of guidance, is around recreational players, which again should still allow, someone who plays badminton and uses a public changing facility, we may want to give some different guidance to someone who might just go jogging, and therefore they're in their own space. So I think the call I would say is I think we have moved on a lot. I think athletes that have spoken publicly are brilliant role models. But we then have to say, what's the impact of that on grassroots sport? And I don't think we've got anywhere near that yet.
Fiona?
Yeah, echo Fenella in that I'm encouraged at the steps towards inclusion that we're making right now. I think we're definitely heading in the right direction. And I would love to, I think more research needs to happen, because I would love to get to a stage where I'm more than comfortable to be on a hockey pitch with a trans woman, and that I am, in my mind, know that there is no significant advantage because the research is so stringent and so thorough that it just can't be argued. But we're not quite at that stage yet.
So you want to see the research, understand it, and have all athletes better informed about it. Yeah. Mike?
I concur. I think that we need to be able to be very clear about what we're trying to achieve. What are we trying to achieve? We're achieving a visual spectacle, sort of a horrible form of voyeurism, which is like a circus, or is this something that we applaud people for doing it and being there? We've also got to be fair to those who are cis as opposed to trans, and say to them, this is the way it is. You have to accept them on a bus or in a changing room. So you've got to accept them perhaps on the playing field as well. And it's trying to level that out, where all the fun and games and the lawyers you guys will be arguing the toss.
Let's finish with the lawyer, Jonathan.
If you believe that it is important to have eligibility depend on sex and have male and female competition, then self-declaration of gender is not a very good rule for policing that line.
Thank you very much for your candidness and your honesty, and for getting a very complex debate, trying to distill it as much as possible. Please join me in thanking Fenella, Adrian, Fiona, Mike and Jonathan. Right, we're drawing to a close. Just a few more things to get through, really. Before we do have a closing speech from the Chairman of Sports Resolutions, I think it's probably pertinent to take a moment to pause and think back over what we have heard and discussed today. We've looked at and debated three very complex subjects that are posing specific challenges for the sports industry today: mental health, integrity, and the rights of transgender athletes. So we heard that mental health is a necessary consideration for everybody throughout an organisation, not just the athletes that the public sees and who are the face of your sports at the top. We heard David Howman call for a worldwide sports integrity body funded by an integrity tax. We have looked at transgender, a complex issue, and learnt that perhaps one set of rules will not fit all. It's very individual, but it needs to be started somewhere, and the IOC have taken a lead with that, with their guidelines. And the day began, of course, with that inspirational presentation from Richard Parkes, who showed us that adversity doesn't have to set us back. It can be an opportunity for reflection and for betterment, and that perhaps we should embrace our weaknesses because they can actually become our greatest strengths. And we're all here because one way or another we have a deep affiliation and connection with sport, personally or professionally, and we all want it to be better. Nothing's perfect, but really hope that today has stimulated some debate, some new thoughts, and in a way that the sports industry as a whole and your input in it can help it to move forward in a way that has greater integrity, has compassion and fairness at the heart as well, too, as the conference says, stay ahead of the game. So to formally thank you all and to close the conference, can you please welcome the Chairman of Sport Resolutions, Edwin Glasgow.
Thank you very much, Alison. Please don't look so worried. You will get a drink very soon. There's one big important principle in life that QCs who are not being paid make extremely short speeches. And my function is simply to thank a few people. I am very much the non-executive chairman of Sport Resolutions, and accordingly I deserve absolutely no credit for the work that it does, and certainly none for today. I am immensely proud of the work that my team do, and I was hugely grateful to David for his endorsement of that. We do try to do what it says on the tin. we do provide resolutions for a very large, increasingly large international number of sportswomen and sportsmen. We put them in that order of importance over an incredibly diverse and growingly varied number of problems, and we provide resolutions for them, not all of which everybody likes, but we think we're getting it right. And since there's no appeal, it's jolly good, because we can never be corrected, so we're always right. The people who do that, and I do want to say some thank yous, because while I, as I say, deserve no credit at all, the executive team who I'm responsible for organising certainly do. Richard Harry, as our chief executive, as you know, is utterly stunning. I thought that Richard was pretty inspirational until I heard his fellow countryman and namesake Richard Parkes, but that's of course a wholly different ballgame. I was hugely grateful to him. And Richard would be the first person to say that his team, and it's a large team, get the credit for the real work that is done at the coalface. Organising today, for example, is Ross and Dugu, who you've of course met, who've been around, and I would like to pay tribute to them, a huge amount of work that they've done. Also, may I just take the occasion to mention the panel, because I see a number of them present. The actual work that we do, the resolutions are provided by our panels. We take enormous care in selecting them. There's not a single woman or man on those panels who isn't exceptional, and the decisions and the awards that they make are increasingly attracting international recognition, and without their work it would simply be impossible. And we're grateful to the chambers who support them and let us have them, so to speak, almost at a subsidised rate. Which brings me to our sponsors. You just can't run these kind of conferences without sponsorship. Ely Place have been hugely generous again. They, of course, are one of the sets of chambers who provide us with a number of our very best panel members. At the risk of being inappropriate, I must mention my own chambers of 39 Essex, because not only do they support us, and they put up with the fact that I do a great deal of pro bono work, including everything I do for this, with bringing no fees at all, and then on top of that, having lost my fees, they then make a financial contribution to the conference, so I'm hugely grateful to them as well. But principally to Winston & Strawn, and they are an extraordinary firm. They don't seem to get the credit over here for the fantastic reputation for pro bono work internationally that they do in the sporting fields, principally from America, but the work that they've done in unpopular cases has been incredible. And now that they have opened a London presence, they deserve our support, and I'm deeply grateful to them for their sponsorship as well. Finally, two people. Alison, who just is an absolute star. I never know when I get flustered and embarrassed at having to address an audience like this, how she does it with the sort of charm that she does and the effectiveness. I thought she was absolutely amazing, and I'd like us to thank her very much for the way she did that, please. And lastly, every one of you, there wouldn't be a conference without you, but there wouldn't be any point in doing it either. We do try and raise subjects that we think are important, that most of them result out of the work that we've done and problems that we've actually faced, and we try to share them with you, with the quality of the panels that we've had, in, I hope, a provocative but not a sensational way, and that's what we've tried to do. So thank you very much again for your support. Please come back next year, and please bring 2 people with you each. Thank you.
Thank you, Edwin. Yeah, we're pretty much finished. Just a couple of things to tell you. All important fact is that the bar is now open until 6. And also, do take your purple goodie bags with you as well. I'm not exactly sure what's inside them, but I'm going to have a look and find out myself. So do take those with you. The bar is open till 6. And big thank you as well to Grange St Paul's for hosting us here for the 4th annual conference as well. Thanks to all of you for being here and joining in the conversation. So I wish you all well over the next 12 months and hope to see you back here next year as well. Thank you.